What's up, guys? I'm Laura from Reading in Bed, and this is going to be a very casual wrap-up of my Man Booker International Prize reading experience. We are on the eve of the prize being awarded, and if any of you know what time that's being announced, please let me know. I'm not finding that information too readily online, and I'm sure I'll be at work, but then at least I can try to block the time off and be ready to register my disgust throughout the world if need be. The shadow jury has already come in with their decision. I'll link that down below and I'll get to it while I'm talking about the books, I'm sure. So yeah, not too much longer to go. So anyway, let's just start. I'll start by addressing the couple of books from the long list that I didn't read. So there were 13 in total, and there were 4 books that I did not get to for various reasons, mostly to do with how available they were. So the first was The Imposter by Javier Cercas. That was just one of those ones that was really tough to get. It's not published in North America till like August or something, and the ebook wasn't available, etc. So, yeah, just didn't get to that one. Go Went Gone by Jenny Erpenbeck. I put on hold at the library right at the beginning, and I think I'm finally coming up for it. I think last I looked, I was number 4 in line, and our library system has 5 copies, so I'm sure any day it's going to come in. So maybe I'll still give it a try, because I've heard a lot of good things about her, and I've never read her before. And next was The Flying Mountain by Christopher Ransmayr. That one was also difficult to obtain, wasn't sure where to order it, and I didn't really have a lot of interest in it, though I've subsequently heard that it's a novel in verse, which sort of made me a little more interested. So yeah, we'll see when it's published here. And lastly was The Dinner Guest by Gabriela Ibana, and that was another one that just wasn't available here till July, but I've subsequently heard a lot of negative things about it, so I'm really not in a rush to get to that one probably ever. So those are the 4 I didn't read. The next, the remaining 9, I'm going to go through in order from sort of least liked to most liked. So, going with the star ratings, I'll start with a couple of 2-star reads. The first of those was The White Book by Han Kang, and I kind of knew I wasn't going to like The White Book, even though I like The Vegetarian, but they're very different, and just knowing what The White Book was, I sort of knew I'd find it a little pretentious and a little meh, and the way I described it in a recent blog post, linked down below, was that it was ethereal, but ultimately empty. So I was left feeling nothing, really. There were some beautiful sentences, but that's about it. Next up is Like a Fading Shadow by Antonio Munoz Molina. So this was kind of a mess. There were like 2 stories, both non-fiction, even though we're calling this a novel. One was about this author's experience writing one of his earlier novels called Winter in Lisbon. And the other story was the story of James Earl Ray, who assassinated Martin Luther King Jr., and who also spent a couple of days, weeks in Lisbon while he was on the run. So while I actually learned a lot, because I couldn't have even told you the name of the guy who assassinated Martin Luther King before, but now I know a lot about him and a lot about how he escaped from prison and how he was on the run, and it's quite an incredible story. I'm not sorry I read this book, because I did take a lot away in terms of historical information and context, and it's stuff that at my age I probably should know. I'm not American, so we didn't cover this in history or in social studies, but still, you should kind of know some of this stuff. But the 2 stories, the author trying to find himself while drinking and drugging and screwing women while his wife was at home with a newborn and a toddler. And the story of James Earl Ray, there was no connection there. It was just so bizarre and self-indulgent in a lot of ways. It was a slog. It took me forever to read. And I paid $15 for the ebook, so... Anyways, thankfully, those were the only 2-star reads on the long list. I had 1 3-star read. I can't remember. I might have actually given this 4 stars on Goodreads, whatever. On second thought, it's more of a 3-star, and that is Die My Love by Ariana Harwitz. So this was the sort of postpartum depression, mother kind of losing her shit. You know, a lot of like dealing with isolation, dealing with the pressures of taking care of a baby, dealing with living in a country and a culture that isn't your own while dealing with all of this, and obviously like mental health themes. And yeah, I expected a lot more from this one just because, you know, I like those kind of books. Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante, for example, is like kind of my pinnacle in that little subgenre. It's fantastic. This one just, I don't know, it didn't really stick with me. It didn't really speak to me. Yeah, I mean, there were some very compelling images, I guess, in there, but like overall it didn't add up to a lot for me. Pretty soon after, I ended up reading Fever Dream. Didn't write down the name of the author, but you guys know who I'm talking about. It's another translated short book about, you know, mothers and children and the bond between them, as well as some really trippy shit going on. And that one was fantastic. I'll put the actual name of the author and all that below, but I would really recommend Fever Dream if you're looking for that sort of like surreal and absurd look at motherhood. So that was my 3-star book. The rest are 4 and 5, which is good news. So I had 3 4-star books. The first was The Seventh Function of Language by Laurent Binet. So kind of similar to like A Fading Shadow. Even if I hadn't liked the story, but I did, I would have been glad to read this just because I learned a lot about semiotics and like French philosophy. So I wrote a whole review of this one. I won't go into it too much, but there was like the learning part of it, but there was also a really fun and zany kind of story going on with it too. And it was not nearly as serious as I thought it was going to be, given this Binet's sort of reputation. It was really just kind of a quick and fun read. Next on the 4-star train is The World Goes On by Laszlo Krasznahorkai. And I like this one a lot more than I thought I would. This one is kind of like, a lot of people are just saying, what the is this book? It is really weird. So my most recent blog post addresses some of that, and I've already talked about The World Goes On here before, so I won't go into it too much. Sadly, it's back at the library, or else I could show you the very cool cover. But if you're up for it, I would definitely recommend it, and you can check out the blog post for some of my reasons why I think it's actually a really good place for anyone to start with this author if you've never read him before, as I had not. And lastly, on the 4-star category, we've got Vernon Subutex 1. Here's one I actually have on hand. So I haven't reviewed this one or talked about it at all, but I may do so. So I guess all I'll say is that this, I've already sort of mentioned this online as a grittier version of High Fidelity. You know, High Fidelity is one of my favorite books of all time. But it has a very personal connection to me, which obviously this one isn't going to replicate, how can it? But it is about sort of the 80s and 90s punk and, you know, alternative music scene, this time in France, obviously, whereas High Fidelity was in the UK. But it sort of veers off. Like, High Fidelity is a very traditional kind of love story narrative. It's, you know, I've heard it called lad lit, as sort of the, it's like a chick lit novel for guys. This one is different because almost every chapter is told from a different character's perspective, and often those characters are really like interesting and cool, but then you only get such a limited time with them. And the other reason this is hard to really talk about is because it's the first in a trilogy. So at the end, there's no conclusion. You know, we've got our main character, Vernon Subutex, who is in possession of these tapes of the last recorded interview with this super famous rock star who just died. And so, like, people are sort of trying to hunt him down for these tapes. And meanwhile, his life has fallen apart. He's living on the streets. But none of it's resolved. At the end, he's sort of like, well, kind of hit rock bottom, but maybe he's on the way back up. The tapes are still somewhere in storage, and people are still looking for him. We don't know what's going to happen. I believe the second one in English is coming out later this year, and then who knows how long until the third comes out, right? So I did enjoy it, though. Obviously, I gave it 4 stars. It was enjoyable. It was not perfect. There are typos in here, like a lot of typos. So Obviously it has a place in my heart if I'm rating it 4 stars despite some like egregious typos. Okay, so that leaves us with the 5 stars. So there were 3 books that I rated 5 stars. The Stolen Bicycle by Wu Mingyi I've already talked about, already reviewed on my blog as well, so I'll just link to those in the interest of time. But it's one of the earlier books that I read on my long list journey, and it's still stuck with me. I still wouldn't change that. It was really great. A unique structure and story, and like some of these other books, I learned some stuff about you know, another country and another culture, but it was also just a really good story. And then there was Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Sadawi, and I've reviewed this as well, just on the blog, not here, so I'll send you over there to look. But this one, I could see it coming down to a 4 star. I don't know if it'll stick with me. There was just something about, you know, the author's kind of, that he just went for it with this very strange story that was meant to portray real life stuff, like contemporary real life issues, using, you know, Frankenstein, like this hundreds years old kind of concept that, you know, is sort of so well known and so in the pop culture that it would be easy for this to go south real fast. Like if you didn't do it properly, it could just be a total mess. But somehow it worked for me, and I just really loved the ending. So I remember when I, you know, kind of closed the book after finishing, I was just like, oh, yeah, this guy like really, really knew what he was doing, was very restrained in a way, despite the sort of weirdness of the book. So 5 stars, yeah, we'll see. I don't know if this one is going to stick with me for the long term, but I would definitely recommend it. And finally, so this is my pick, obviously, to win, and it was also the pick of the Shadow Jury, and that is Flights by Olga Tokarczuk. So I recently wrote about this on my blog. Like many of these, I'll link to it. So you can see there I wrote more about the things, you know, some of the standout stories, some of the reasons I liked it. But one of the things that I didn't think I would get out of it is just like, I don't know, I feel like I've been looking for a woman writer that I can sort of look up to, that has a unique way of putting things, that is, you know, modern, but, you know, a little older than me, say a little older and wiser, and someone that just isn't super precious about their writing and isn't one of those, like, writers writing about writing. That's one of my pet peeves. And this is such a weird book. Like, it is kind of a mix of memoir and short story and personal essay and flash fiction. So it's, like, really audacious in that way. She just, you know, just put this out there and we are sort of left us to figure it out. But through that, I think I found what I've been looking for. I've been reading over the last couple of years, I think, a lot of books by women writers. I'm like, oh, maybe, you know, maybe this will be someone I really click with. Like the example I can show is Bluets by Maggie Nelson. This book like didn't do anything for me, even though it's like in some ways a similar concept to Flights, even a similar color. It's just these small pieces, and they're sort of like auto fiction. You know, maybe it's memoir, maybe it's fiction, maybe it's somewhere in between. But this one just left me totally with nothing. Whereas Flights, some of it's funny, some of it's super sad. I did cry during one story, and just so many of the stories are so simple but so profound. Yeah, I mean, this is a new favorite author. I'm just sorry that there isn't more of her stuff translated in English now, although I believe a couple more, including the Book of Jacob, are coming out through this publisher, so they'll look like this later this year. So I don't know, I'm just looking forward to reading more. I really hope to see this win. I'm really glad the Shadow Jury picked it as well. And yeah, so that's Flights. So that is it. It's been a really good experience. I've never followed a prize list this closely before, not even the Giller Prize, which is our big prize here in Canada. I usually can't be bothered, even though the books are very readily available. But I was looking for something different, and I definitely found it. I learned a lot. I had some great conversations with other people out there who are reading this prize, and it's just overall been very positive. So watch out for me to come back with this next year, and let's all get ready to be outraged tomorrow when the prize is awarded. Thanks for watching.